Today I'm going to review a very interesting game played between two of my one-on-one chess students. With white we've got Bruce, rated 619, and his opponent with the black pieces is Paul, rated 1319. Now, despite the 700-point rating gap, suffice to say this game is a lot closer than you might think. It's very instructive actually, so let's just jump right in. We get d4 from Bruce, knight f6 from Paul. I'll run through the opening fairly quickly because both of my students played good solid opening moves here, grabbing space in the centre, developing their pieces sensibly, preparing to castle, and both sides did castle, and then we got the move e4. Now this is the main pawn break that white is always trying to play in the setup that white has gone for here. This is a Collet system setup. So we've got the knight on d2, which looks a bit strange, but the idea is that if black were to capture here, then this knight from d2 is able to recapture. But actually in the game, it was Paul, the much higher rated player, who made the first opening inaccuracy here by playing c4. Now what this does is it closes the center of the board, and this gives white a free hand to attack on the king side. If we look at this pawn structure, it's pointing straight towards the black king side, and that means that white's got great attacking prospects. Black needs to have some counterplay in the center to mollify that kingside initiative that white has got. So by playing c4, the central tension is gone, and we're going to see how white can play this now. Another inaccuracy that you can often see against the Collet system is black might play something like knight to c6, a natural developing move, but that would allow the e5 pawn advance. Now getting a pawn to e5, it was Alexander Alyakin actually, the 4th world chess champion, who once said that a pawn on e5 is a signal to attack. So the knight has to move away, and this knight should really be on f6 because it helps with the defense of the black king. Without this knight on f6, the h7 pawn, which the knight would guard, is quite a bit weaker. So white could look to play something like bishop to b1, queen to c2, like threatening checkmate straight away against the h7 square. Black would probably be forced to play a move like g6. Like, let's just give white a couple of moves here. Well, in order to avoid checkmate, you're going to have to play something like g6, and that's a weakening pawn move around the black king, which white can look to exploit later. Not immediately, but now the dark squares are quite weak around the black king. So let's go back to the game. We got c4, and Bruce dropped the bishop back to c2. Dropping it back all the way to b1 could also be an idea to get the queen to c2, just putting the queen in front of the bishop, which is going to cause black more problems. But bishop to c2 is also fine. We get knight to c6, and then the e5 pawn advance. So I have to say, it's actually Bruce so far, the lower rated player, who is outplaying his higher rated opponent in the opening and early middle game. This is the dream position for a Collet system player. This kind of thing with a closed center and a pawn on e5. White has got amazing attacking prospects here. We get rook to e1. The idea of this is to perhaps bring the knight to f1 and then eventually to e3 or maybe to g3. And then we get f6 from black. White continues with the knight to f1 plan, just to show an alternative idea here. When the pawn on e5 is challenged by f6, it can often actually be a good idea to take. Now, this allows the black knight back into the game, back to f6, so maybe now white isn't going to be able to attack the black king that effectively with the knight back on its defensive post. But there's a new weakness that white can target now. It's the pawn on e6. And white could even look to target this straight away with knight to g5. So now that pawn is attacked twice. It's what we call a backward pawn. And black is forced into some contortions in order to defend it. Something like queen to c8, which is, very passive, but it's kind of forced at the same time to just hold on to the defense of this weak pawn. So that would have been an alternative way to play, and something worth bearing in mind in future. When you see the pawn on e5 challenged by f6, it can be a good idea to take and then target this weakened pawn on e6 when there's a similar pawn structure. This can often be something that happens in the French defense as well. But back to the game, knight to f1. Okay, so actually black goes ahead and captures in the center, and white recaptures with a piece. I have to say, like, so far Bruce's play has been indistinguishable from someone who's rated, I mean, even at my level, I wouldn't be shocked to see this kind of play at the 2000 level. So obviously Bruce knows this opening extremely well, and he's proving it so far. And here we actually get a chance for Bruce to gain a winning advantage. If you'd like, you could pause the video and see what the move you'd like to consider playing here with white. Now let's remember, the idea for white in the Colle system, especially when you've got such a great attacking position with the center closed, is to attack the black king. So try and find a move which is aggressive in intent and which brings a piece closer to the action. Well, the move here which white could have played was queen to h5, and this is actually very difficult for black to defend. The obvious threat is to play queen to h7 checkmate, and what can black do in response? Well, if you play h6, well then the queen can just slip in here, and it's going to be very tough indeed for black to survive. If you try and take off the strong knight, well, you could give the check on h7 first and then capture the knight. Now the bishop is under attack, it has to move. If it does move though, then it's actually checkmate. So that would have been a quick way to finish the game. After queen to h5, you could also consider g6, but there's a very thematic sacrifice here, and it is of course to sacrifice on g6 when you've got the queen and the bishop and formerly the knight as well, all targeting that weak pawn. Then it's worth remembering that a sacrifice should definitely be considered. Recapture with the queen, and black is going to have to try blocking this with something like knight to g7, but then another white piece comes in, and it's really hard for black to defend this. The threat of queen to h7 is very strong. You can bring another piece in with knight to g3 and then eventually knight to h5. Really bad news for black here. And I think actually if queen to h5 had been played, then Bruce would have had great chances to secure a memorable victory. However, the move that he played was also quite understandable. I mean, given the fact that this pawn on e6 is weak, Bruce decided to remove the defender of the weak pawn. This is a mistake only because queen to h5 was even better. So queen takes d7, the recapture, that was of course necessary, and then we get rook to e3, a very interesting idea, and also a very thematic idea to swing the rook up to the third rank to continue the attack. Now, if you're enjoying the video so far, and if you're enjoying the way that I'm analysing the game, and you're looking to improve your own chess, I'd just like to remind you that Bruce and Paul are both my students, and if you'd like to join them, click the link in the description below. We can see if working together will be a good fit to improve your game as well. But rook to e3, I really like this move from Bruce actually. It's very aggressive and intent, coming around to h3 perhaps to target the h7 pawn. So then we get e5, which I think is a very good move from Paul in response, just looking to open the center up a bit. And then we get rook to h3. So that's responding to the threat with a bigger threat, something that I often talk about on this channel. The threat, of course, is on the h7 pawn. So black has to do something about that. And it's done with the move e4. Now the move here to refute e4 is not that easy to find, but let me try and explain the concept. Because this bishop has been shut out of the action with the e4 pawn advance, you have to fight against that. You have to fight against black's pawn on e4. Now the way to do that is with the move f3. This fights against the pawn, and if black were to capture, well then of course you can take on h7 first with check, an intermediate move, And then once the king moves away, I think probably to f7, if it were to go to h8 instead, then there'll be some pretty nasty discovered check there, picking up the black queen. So yeah, king to f7 and then capturing here on f3, and there's all sorts of dangers here for the black king. It's marching out into the center of the board, and bad news indeed. There's many checks here that white will be able to consider. What we got instead though from white was the move bishop to h6. Now this is a move which I can only imagine was played due to feeling that the attack needed to be continued with a sacrifice. But this was a bit too optimistic, and one thing that I like to tell my students is that if you're going to give up a piece like this, then you should really be as sure as you can possibly be that you're going to be either checkmating or recovering the material. This is a move or a sacrifice which has been made on instinct, I think. It's just imagining that it's going to open up a line which looks dangerous, but concretely, is it? Is it really going to cause black enough problems for the material that you're going to lose here? Well, the answer is no. This is a blunder. Paul goes ahead and takes the material which was on offer, and then rook to g3 check was Bruce's idea, but the black king just hides away on h8, and there isn't a clear follow-up actually for white. The next move from white also isn't very good because white is material down now, so offering the queen trade is actually giving black exactly what they want here. Black is material up, so black would like to trade and simplify into an easily winning endgame. So Paul realizes this, trades queens. I agree with that decision, absolutely. I do the same thing. And you know, the next part of the game is something that I'll go over rather quickly, because we get a series of moves where neither side really gets any extra advantage or disadvantage. We get some trades, so actually black is getting a bit closer to the end game that he desires. But Bruce is not giving up here. He gets his bishop active. He, avoids further trades. Now he actually finds the f3 move, which is excellent. It's fighting against the strong pawn on e4 from black, and we get the trade, and now his bishop has improved, right? I think that trade actually improves white's position quite a bit, because formerly these pawns were tough to target, but after f3 and the capture, now the bishop is targeting the pawn on d5. So a bit of counterplay there, and Paul looks to defend the pawn on d5 with the knight. And another good move here, getting the rook to the open file. So white is down a piece, and obviously black is winning, but white's pieces are on very good squares. This rook controls the open file, this bishop has got a target as well. And now actually Paul makes a serious mistake, defending this pawn with the rook. This is a passive move. This actually wasn't necessary. The knight was already defending the pawn. So rook to d6 is actually refuted by the move g4. The thing about this is a great move actually, this is an excellent move from Bruce here, is that it attacks the knight, which is responsible for defending the other knight. Now the engine still shows that black is winning here, but the way to prove that is very difficult for a human to see. You've got to sacrifice the knight on d4. The idea of this is that even though you can win the other knight with check, black is able to play king to f6, so now the rook's attacked. The rook's got to go back to defend, and then after this series of trades, the black king gets active and black remains a pawn up. But that's all very hard to see for a human. Yeah, sacrificing the knight. I guess you could find that move just by seeing that this knight was going to be lost anyway. But what was played instead after g4 is that black tried to prevent this knight from being lost by pinning the pawn. But here again, white, the lower rated player, found the only move that that kept the kept the threat alive, and that was king to f2. So now the king is no longer on the g file, so the pawn is no longer pinned in front of it. And yeah, this knight is attacked, and once it moves, as it did, then the other knight gets lost. And this is a critical moment, actually. This is feedback that I need to provide to Paul, the higher rated player. This check and the way that you respond to this check could actually have decided the game as well. So the move played was king to f6, which makes a lot of sense. You're trying to get the king active, but it actually hands the advantage to white here, because now white can collect all these pawns on the 7th rank, starting with rook takes b7, quite simply. Yeah, and then this other pawn is attacked, and so is this one. And if black were to play rook to g7 to prevent white from taking more pawns, then, well, the trade of rooks actually now also leads to a winning endgame for white. What black should have done instead, after the check, was to play king to f8. Now, endgames are very difficult, and seeing the difference between king to f8, which is the move that you should play, and king to f6, which was the move that black did play, is very difficult. But let me explain why this difference exists and why it matters. The thing is that after king to f8, white doesn't have time to grab these pawns, because then black can respond by playing rook to f6. And now that bishop is actually going to be lost, and black is going to regain the piece advantage, which black had just lost earlier. In the actual game, the king is on f6, so the rook to f6 move wasn't possible. So I think, yeah, king to f8 is tough to see unless you're thinking in the right way, that you have to attack the rook in a way that means that you can't take these pawns because there's another threat incoming. But after king to f6, Bruce unfortunately didn't find the right way to continue. Taking all these pawns would have led to a winning position, as I mentioned, but instead Bruce decided to go back with the rook to e3. Now, this wasn't necessary. The bishop was already defended by the white king. That is the only reason that I can kind of think that he would have brought the rook back like this, thinking that the bishop was under attack and needed defending. But you always want to avoid going passive, and the rook was, well, it was wonderful on the 7th rank and could collect some pawns as well. So a couple of reasons to avoid going backwards, winning material for one and staying active for another. So rook to e3 brought the game back to equal, so there's been a lot of swings in the momentum in this game. And now Paul went for this trade, and king to e7 was played. Another check, maybe looking for a repetition. And now we get the offer of a rook trade, which actually, because the kings are in front of the rooks, means that either player can look to initiate that if they want the pawn endgame. So Bruce decided to go for the pawn endgame, and now this is very technical. These pure pawn endgames are won or lost based on things like opposition, things like triangulation, things like Zugzwang. So yeah, they are very tough to play, and even very strong players get them wrong. Now, it's showing equal, but as I mentioned, it's easy for one small inaccuracy to lead to an equal position going to losing. That's just how endgames are. Like an inaccuracy in the opening or in the middle game rarely leads to a losing position, but in the endgame, that's just how it goes. So we got king to f3. Now this is okay. The engine still thinks that it's all right, but I would have preferred in this position h4, because one thing in the endgame is to try and get your king active, and I guess king to f3 is getting the white king active, but it allows the black king to get active as well via king to g5. The move h4 instead would have prevented the black king from getting to the square that it really wanted to get to. So king to f3, and then king to g5. And now white needed to understand that you've got to stop the king coming into h4. So king to g3 I think was necessary, and then you could play h4 next to expel the black king away from that square. But what was played instead was h4 check. Now the idea of this from Bruce was to sacrifice this pawn in order to get the white king over to f4, collect the d pawn and try and promote with d5, d6, d7 and d8 equals queen. But as I mentioned, endgames are very concrete, and as it turns out, the black pawns on the h-file are just faster. You need to see 5, 6, 7 moves ahead in order to calculate this, but yeah, that is the challenge with endgames. And it's why sometimes when you can't calculate ahead that far, you need to just accept that the game is equal and just try and keep it to be a draw. I mean, a draw for Bruce here against a player rated 700 points higher than him would have been a great result. So yeah, this was just a bit overly ambitious, and it also was a failure of endgame calculation, I'm afraid. But we learn from our mistakes, and we can do better next time. So yeah, h4 just allowed the black pawns to advance, but actually even here, the funny thing is that with accurate play, white could still have come back and held the draw. White would have needed to play extremely accurately here, because this black pawn is very scary, and if you, well, I guess you can go after this pawn here, but yeah, it's tough. You have to calculate ahead a lot of moves. If you can calculate ahead all of these moves, then you'll see that the pawns promote at the same time. But you know, good luck calculating all of this. Very tough. But yeah, this is equal. This is equal because both queens get on the board at the same time. But what was played in the game instead was after the pawn was lost, white just went after the d pawn straight away. That was the idea after all. But then the black pawn marched up the board and got to queen first, and at this point white had to resign. So a really interesting game there. I think a game which the player rated in the 600s could have easily won on many occasions. And you know, I think it shows that with a bit of work, Bruce could be rising his rating very quickly up to a much higher level. So well done to both players. Well done to Bruce for putting up an excellent fight, and well done to Paul for getting the win.